This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. What if comparing car insurance rates was as easy as putting on your favorite podcast? With Progressive, it is. Just visit the Progressive website to quote with all the coverages you want. You'll see Progressive's direct rate, then their tool will provide options from other companies so you can compare. All you need to do is choose the rate and coverage you like. Quote today at progressive.com to join the over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Hey there, Hang Up listeners. Before you start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our partners, SAP. AI comes at you fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Whether you're looking to automate tasks or embed AI in your business processes, SAP can help. To learn more, head to sap.com/AI and stick around for expert advice on how to embrace AI with confidence.
Hi, I'm Stefan Fatsis, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of July 15th, 2024. On this week's show, soccer writer Ryan O'Hanlon of ESPN joins us to discuss the horrifying scenes at the Copa America final in Miami, where thousands of fans were trapped outside the stadium in searing heat for hours before the game. We'll also talk to Ryan about the firing of Gregg Berhalter after the U.S. team flamed out in the group stage of the Copa. Finally, I'll interview the 2024 American Crossword Puzzle Tournament champion Paulo Pasco, who once solved a New York Times Monday puzzle in 45 seconds, and crossword competitor Kim Vu, who wrote a fantastic story about the tournament for Defector. Slate staff writer Joel Anderson is off this week. I'm the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside, and I'm in Washington, D.C. Also in Washington, it's my friend Josh Levine, the author of The Queen and the host of an upcoming Slate Slow Burn about the rise of Fox News. Hey, Josh.
Hello, Stefan. Thank you for hosting.
Sure, my pleasure. It's always my pleasure to host. And since this is another summer show, which is kind of why I'm hosting, Joel's off, we're only doing a couple segments, something had to hit the cutting room floor, and it was Wimbledon. But let's chat now, shall we, for a minute? Because I know you want to talk about Wimbledon. Carlos Alcaraz pretty roundly squashed Novak Djokovic in the men's final. Is the Big Three era officially over, Josh? Can we now focus entirely on Alcaraz, who has 4 majors at just 21 years old, Italy's Jannik Sinner, who was the top seed in England and lost in the semifinals, and a few other dudes?
I think that Djokovic is not dead yet. I think he's actually alive, but also not dead in more figurative terms. But a thing that has happened, more recently that had never happened before in a Grand Slam final is Djokovic just having a bad day, which is a thing that athletes say. I remember, I think Chris Everett talking about it in the context of tennis, but and other sports as well, is just that, especially in a format like tennis, in a tournament where you need to be at your best and show up 7 times in a couple-week period, you're just not going to have your best every time out when you get older. And Djokovic is also coming off knee injury, knee surgery, a meniscus
like a month
thing.
ago.
Just a month ago.
He had meniscal surgery like a month ago.
Yeah, and I think the perspective he had on it was great tournament for me. I'm happy that I made it this far. And so given that he's, the greatest of all time, especially in terms of Grand Slam winning, just any kind of failure like this at the final stage is going to look just like it's not up to a standard, because it isn't up to a standard. And as Alcaraz and Sinner keep improving, you do start to wonder, can he raise his level at this age? And I think, what history suggests to us is both yes and no. Djokovic has always raised his level at every moment whenever anyone has doubted him. And no, because whether it's, Lionel Messi, who we're about to talk about, or LeBron James or anyone else, age comes for everyone. And so, where I tend to net out is that Djokovic will still compete. He'll probably still win again, but Alcaraz and Sinner are going to dominate the sport, and their rivalry will come to define this sport in a way that, the big three define their era. So we're at this kind of bridge moment, and also the fact that these athletes do compete for longer means that it's not just like Federer playing Sampras once. Like we'll get to see this kind of intersection for a little while longer, which is a good thing.
It is a good thing. And the women's side seems like it's completely up in the air. Iga Swiatek went out fairly early in this tournament, and a lot of players that a lot of casual fans probably hadn't heard of made it to the final stages.
Yeah, Barbara Krejcikova won, who has a Grand Slam title. She won the French a few years ago, and that kind of contradicts what I'm about to say, but women's tennis is totally predictable on clay. Iga is kind of as dominant as Rafa Nadal was at his peak. She just wins every French Open, but grass court tennis and clay court tennis and the women's game, there is this sort of like divergence and success and these different surfaces that there used to be in this sport. There's been a sort of flattening out, I think, especially on the men's side, where all the great players compete well on all the surfaces. But in the women's game, for whatever reason, it seems like there is the sort of disparate results. And we haven't mentioned Naomi Osaka, for instance, has had amazing success on hard courts at her peak. And she seems to be kind of coming back now, was just dominant in the hard court majors and never had any success in either the French or Wimbledon. And so, Coco Gauff has never done that well at Wimbledon. So it makes for more unpredictable and at times more kind of interesting and exciting, Grand Slam season. But I think at the US Open, to see Iga, to see Coco, to see Arina Sabalenka had to pull out of this tournament, to see all of those players we've become more familiar with kind of at the late stages, I think it would be a surprise if they didn't make it that far.
And to see Jasmine Paolini, who made the finals of the French and the finals at Wimbledon, and everyone seems to love, and is 28 and a player who has risen rapidly recently to the finals of these huge events.
Yeah, I mean, she's small, doesn't have a big serve, had never made the second round of a major before this year. And so I think, and she has a delightful presence, but I think maybe let's enjoy her while we have her and not necessarily predict huge things. But she's been tremendous and should be incredibly proud of what she's accomplished, no matter if she keeps making finals or doesn't.
I'll take that as that you don't expect to see her make the finals of a third straight major in New York.
Don't expect it, but who knows?
Now, as always, we want to thank our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. One way we do that is with a bonus episode. This week, crossword champ Paulo Pasco and crossword constructor, competitor, and writer Kim Vu talk about the art of constructing a crossword puzzle. It was dubbed the Summer of Soccer, and Sunday's contribution was English sadness and American madness. In Berlin, Spain beat England 2-1 in the final of the Men's European Championship. In Miami later, Argentina beat Colombia 1-0 in the final of the Men's Copa America. The games were compelling, and the results affirmed some storylines. Spain sits atop the sport for both the men and women, and England still hasn't won a big men's title since 1966. But the story of the weekend was the horrific crowding, chaos, and security failures that led to an 82-minute delay in the start of the Copa final at Hard Rock Stadium. Joining us now is Ryan O'Hanlon. He writes about soccer for ESPN and is the author of Net Gains, Inside the Beautiful Games Analytics Revolution. He also writes the Substack No Grass in the Clouds, to which you should subscribe. Welcome to the show, Ryan.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start with the terrifying scenes in Miami. Thousands of fans pushed up against locked stadium gates, people knocking down barriers, climbing over walls, and literally snaking through a vent to get inside the stadium. What did you make of those videos and images, and do you think the game should have been played at all?
Since the Copa America started, it's been sort of a progressively horrific series of, I call them hijinks at first, and then just complete disaster by the end, starting with the fields not being of the right quality, then with players running into the stands, fighting Colombia fans after Uruguay-Colombia game, and then that yesterday. And I think, with all the information that's come out since the game ended, with the reporting that's been done, Absolutely not. I mean, I don't really care about the logistics of having to replay this game or award co-winners or anything. It was a complete mess. People's lives seem to be in danger. It seems like they absolutely shouldn't have played the game.
So this tournament was managed by CONMEBOL, the South American Federation. And, a lot was said about at this, Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. They've hosted concerts. They've hosted NFL games. It seems kind of simplistic to me to just say this is the South American Federation's fault, despite all of the problems in the tournament. So I don't know if either of you guys have thoughts or want to weigh in on that. Like, obviously, CONMEBOL had a lot of fuck-ups during this tournament and seems like they should get a share of the blame. But just to say this would have worked perfectly at this stadium, if not for the South Americans, that just seems impossible to me.
Yeah, I guess there's a question of like, does CONMEBOL even have the capacity to handle something like this? I mean, obviously they've hosted Copa America before, but I think with the number of fans that are able to come to these games in the US compared to some of the places where the Copa America is in South America, I don't just blame CONMEBOL, because I don't even, obviously pretty much soccer executives across all regions are pretty inadequate, and that's been true in the history of soccer. Given the task at hand, I don't know if CONMEBOL could even be equipped to handle something like this.
Yeah, and I think the question for me, Josh, is how CONMEBOL was allowed to stage these games with the kind of security apparatus, fan funneling, just basic operational procedures. I mean, even the fight where the Uruguayan players went into the stands after the game against Colombia in the semifinals, the players and coaches said that they went in because their families and friends were being attacked. And that raised a very simple logistical question, which was, why were families of players allowed to be seated in the same section as regular fans of an opposing team? That just doesn't happen at high-level matches. In Miami, some basic protocols that you would find at World Cup games were not followed, creating multiple perimeters outside the stadium, checkpoints where only people with tickets are allowed to pass or with credentials are allowed to pass. That didn't happen. So you had thousands, according to reports, of fans who didn't have tickets storming and barging into the stadium hours before the game, which is what led police and security to lock down the stadium. And that led to this crush of humanity outside, which led to literally gates being broken down, barriers being broken down, and fans entering the stadium with or without tickets. There was no checking whatsoever once the system broke down.
Maybe to your point, Josh, in 2022, it wasn't to this scale, but there was a massive delay ahead of the Champions League final. Mm-hmm. Liverpool fans were getting tear gassed by police, and that's seemingly wealthier and obviously different organization, UEFA, running that. So, we've seen other federations fail in similar ways, I guess.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned kind of earlier in the tournament, Ryan, things that seemed lower stakes, like the conditions of the fields.
The size of the fields, they were 5 yards narrower than a FIFA regulation field because NFL stadiums are narrower.
Yeah, the refereeing for sure. I mean, this tournament had a feel the entire way of something that was jerry-rigged, something that was being kind of a square peg being fit into a round hole. Sometimes, I guess, literally in the case of stadiums, being the wrong shape for these games. And, when you also talk about the words inadequate and unequipped, I think of Fox, the broadcaster, which in covering this debacle on Sunday night, which turned into a breaking news event, it just felt like their operation on the ground in terms of their reporting apparatus, their production apparatus, and their commentators, people who are being kind of called on to put this into context and to put a sort of human gloss on it rather than just an analysis about the players on the field. It was just a total abject failure. Stefan, you sent around just before we started recording this thread from Carolyn Holden, Stu Holden's wife, Stu Holden being the color commentator for Fox, just about her experience outside the gates with her daughter and how scary and at times horrifying it was. And I just thought, like, this is better and more visceral coverage than anything I saw or heard on Fox all Sunday evening.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the Champions League final, and luckily during that game, Jamie Carragher was one of the analysts, and he's a former Liverpool player. He's from Liverpool. Liverpool, the club, had two sort of horrific disasters where fans died in the 80s. So he was very well equipped to discuss a situation like this. And on Fox, like you said, like, if you just watched the game and then went to bed, there was just some sort of, like I said earlier, hijinks from fans. Like you don't realize that it was actually this disastrous, like dangerous situation where people actually felt for their lives. And you go back to the Uruguay-Colombia game as well. They just showed like a little clip of the Uruguay players and the fans and barely discussed what was happening at all.
Yeah, you really didn't have a sense, Ryan, at the Uruguay Colombia game of what was going on. I mean, your initial thought was, oh, this is crazy. This is like Malice at the Palace. And only later did we get the reporting needed to contextualize this. And the same thing happened on Fox. I mean, this game was delayed by 82 minutes. And during that time, the bulk of the commentary from the crew in the studio was about the game.
Do you have that clip of Alexi Lalas that we can hear now?
Yeah. Let's play that. This is Alexi Lalas, who was on the commentary crew for Fox.
I have no doubt that FIFA and the United States and Canada and Mexico will sort this out and make sure that this doesn't happen going forward. But I think it also shows that don't let anybody tell you that America is not a soccer nation. Don't let anybody tell you that the United States does not have an incredible history and doesn't have fans out there. There are millions of soccer fans, and they are going to either come from other places here and join the millions that exist, or, like I said, the ones that are already here. I think this shows that there are many home teams when it comes to the U.S., but there is a fervor and there is a passion for this game and for these tournaments that is going to be on display for the next 2 years and is going to culminate in what I think is going to be the most important and biggest summer of soccer when it comes to the summer of 2026.
I will point out that after the game, someone either told Alexi Lalas that he should follow up on that, or he did it on his own. And he tweeted, if you're a fan without a ticket and you break into the stadium, you're to blame. If you are a fan with a ticket and you break into the stadium, you're to blame. If you are an organizer and the fans with tickets can't safely get into the venue, you're to blame.
I mean, it does raise the question of, if Alexi Lalas is the one commentating, do we want him actually doing any kind of analysis of, I was going to say things outside of soccer, but I don't think we want him doing any analysis of things inside of soccer either.
I mean, it was outrageous, Ryan. I mean, what a dumb thing to say. I know they're struggling to fill airtime, Josh, because they've got 80 minutes and clearly don't have reporters who can go report on the actual story, which was the insanity and the threat of a mass casualty event outside the stadium. But they did not fill their airtime in a particularly honorable way.
Yeah, and just to kind of get to the soccer a little bit here, it did seem fitting that, Lionel Messi, the star, the showcase, the centerpiece, the reason I think that a lot of fans were there and that Fox wanted to broadcast this tournament ended up having to leave the match with a grotesquely swollen ankle and, was seen in tears on the bench, which I think Fox did a good job of highlighting that and getting us pictures of that moment. And I think, with or without Messi on the field, I just think that moment was a testament to maybe why everything else happened, like why everyone cares, why these countries care, these players clearly care, and we care. Like, the reason that this game was played was to see Messi, not in this situation, obviously, on the bench in tears. But Ryan, I mean, this is a player and a team around this player who have now won 2 Copa Americas, sandwiching a World Cup. And, Stefan saying in his introduction that Spain is atop the men's soccer world. That seems a bit counterfactual given, we're going to get to settle it on the field with the, whatever it's called, the UEFA Copa America Grand Championship next year.
Yeah, I mean, the fitting end to this was Argentina winning with Messi, like playing no role at all and playing a pretty peripheral role on the field for most of the tournament. But yeah, from a soccer perspective, it really is. It's easy to forget because of how beloved Messi is, and how beloved Messi is, I think, played a large role in what happened yesterday. I don't think Messi's popularity dwarfs anything in the U.S. It's like the Pope going somewhere or something like that. But it's easy to forget that, like, his relationship with Argentina was not great for a lot of his career because he went to Spain at a young age. He was sort of seen as not being authentically Argentinian for a lot of his career as the national team did well, but failed in final after final, while he was just sort of demolishing our conceptions of what was possible on a soccer field playing in Europe. And now it's just Argentina is arguably the greatest national team of all time, all of a sudden. Spain is the only other country to win a continental tournament, then a World Cup, then their continental tournament right after. And Argentina just did that. So it's kind of wild to sort of look back at all the consternation at the beginning of his career and it ending with Argentina just at the highest point that they've ever been at, essentially.
We didn't even get to Uruguay coach Marcelo Bielsa going on a crazy rant before the third place game at Copa America, calling CONMEBOL and the organizers a plague of liars. A plague of liars. We'll be back with more with Ryan O'Hanlon in a minute. We're going to talk about Gregg Berhalter and his departure from the U.S. men's national soccer team.
If there's one thing sports fans love as much as watching games, it's talking about them, especially the stats. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right. You could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/credit card.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Here's our expert, the technology futurist, Ian Kahn.
Hi, I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, the supply chain has been a friend and foe to my company. Can AI make us more resilient? Signed, Supply Chained to Uncertainty.
Hey Supply, here's how AI in the supply chain can help. AI can massively automate data analytics and understand the movement of your goods. AI can point out weak links, market demand trends, optimal logistics, and other important aspects that impact the top and bottom lines for the business. Take the example of a large grocery chain that has hundreds of vendors spread through the country. In some cases, you may need to reroute shipments to other stores, such as in the case of fresh produce, a good that can go bad very fast. Managing such a supply chain is heavily dependent on the data provided, and AI can help optimize this information so that your supply chain works at its optimal levels.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
The United States exited Copa America in the group stage. It was one of the most disappointing results in a major tournament for the U.S. since, the last disappointing result in a major tournament for the United States. The one thing that happened of note afterward was that the U.S. Soccer Federation fired Gregg Berhalter, whom it had hired 6 years ago and then 2 years ago to be the head coach of this team. Ryan, you wrote about sort of wish casting for the next coach of the U.S. and what would happen or what it would take for Liverpool's former coach, Jurgen Klopp, to take over. But before we get to that, were you surprised that U.S. Soccer took this step?
Yeah, I was surprised because I think they had a pretty easy out with Gregg Berhalter last time. It wasn't like the last cycle with the U.S. was fine. I thought they played reasonably well at the World Cup. They did fine in qualifying. They had one of the youngest teams of the tournament. But there's the whole controversy with Gio Reyna, Gregg Berhalter's incident with his wife, and there was a long delay in Gregg Berhalter coming back. So the fact that they eventually brought him back, to me, signified that they were pretty committed to him. And then the fact that they fired him, I think the sort of proximate cause of him being fired was a player on the U.S. punching another player on Panama and getting a red card, and eventually leading to the U.S. losing a game to Panama, which eliminated them from the group stages. I don't really know if I see the U.S. firing Gregg Berhalter if the U.S. gets out of the group stages.
I think that, they got absolutely pummeled by Colombia in a friendly, which is just a friendly leading up to Copa America. But I think if they got out of the group and got similarly pummeled like 5-0 in the first knockout game, like I think there is probably like a narrow pathway to him getting fired. But you're right. It was the Tim Weah red card that did it. And one of the things that you kind of do so well in all of your coverage on ESPN, Ryan, is just talk about how there's so few data points in this entire sport. There's even fewer data points in international soccer, that actual goals don't really line up with expected goals being more of a predictor of future performance. And so you can kind of make any argument that you want to make, and just like the points are just so disparate and random and far in between that you can kind of create a line or any shape that you want to. And so you're right. Like if you wanted an out, you could say, well, they would have gotten out of the group if not for this red card. If you wanted an out 2 years ago, you could have said that Berhalter's behavior around Gio Reyna, or the team's just kind of like, just like basically hitting every marker, but not going above that. You could have fired him then. And so it is sort of a strange pattern. And the whole kind of issue with his hiring from the beginning was that his brother was involved with U.S. Soccer, that it just seemed like the books were cooked. And so I guess if anything here is surprising, it just felt like they were committed to him, and they would have to admit this institution that seems stubborn and blinkered in a lot of ways would have to admit that it had made a mistake, which I guess it did.
Yeah, which the sort of whole Berhalter hire, I think, is sort of a symptom of U.S. soccer taking the wrong lessons from the Jurgen Klinsmann era. I think a lot of people at U.S. soccer viewed that as, this is what happens when we hire someone outside of U.S. soccer. When the issue is really that Klinsmann was, frankly, sort of a buffoon, and just his history since has shown that he's just not a good soccer coach. So they just hired the wrong person from the outside is probably what the issue was, not that they hired an outsider. And then Berhalter is sort of the most U.S. soccer of U.S. soccer people, and that he played for the U.S. His brother was a high up executive. And now they have another quote unquote outsider in Matt Crocker, who's British, making the decisions. Granted, his first decision was to hire Gregg Berhalter in the first place, and he completely botched that, it seemed like. So, yeah, I think if you want to view this as some form of introspection or acceptance of a mistake, or the U.S. soccer potentially moving in the right direction towards someone that doesn't have these U.S. soccer ties, my guess is that's probably where they would move with the head coaching. But U.S. soccer, they never cease to disappoint. So it wouldn't surprise me if another sort of U.S. soccer lifer gets the job.
But you also put some responsibility on the players here. You wrote in a piece after the Copa exit. Don't get me wrong, there are lots of terrible national team managers out there. England is not struggling because of a lack of talent. Portugal didn't nearly lose to Slovenia because its player pool isn't good enough. The best you can say that Berhalter did this summer is, well, nothing. He didn't make the team better. He didn't make it worse. He was just sort of there. And you go on to point out how a lot of the players that we looked at 2 or 4 years ago as a golden generation, to use the soccer cliche, have kind of had difficult, to put it in one term, club careers, whether it's through injury or lack of performance or just sort of not living up to the potential that we thought they would live up to. I mean, it is hard to bring these guys together a couple of times a year and to play so few games together and get so few reps together, but that's how they're judged. I mean, how much here does sort of fall on the players and the ability of a coach to take where they are actually at and do something with them?
Yeah, I think it mostly falls on the players. I think in soccer, possibly because it's sort of so dynamic and complex and hard to understand, we end up giving them way too big of a chunk of the credit to the managers when what's happening on the field is determined by, the relationship between the players and the creative decisions they make on the fly. And I think in international soccer, it's kind of the tension at the heart of this whole, who should the manager be? We blame the manager everything with US soccer. They're barely coaching the team. They get maybe 20 training sessions a day, and any coach would tell you the way to actually improve the team. There's a quote from Jurgen Klopp: 2 ways to improve the team are sign new players and training. And as a national team coach, you can't sign new players and you barely train together. So I think that the quality of the players with any team is the main driver in performance. And I just think, like you kind of pointed out in summing up what I wrote, this is the best generation of US players ever, but it's also probably around sort of the 30 percentile outcome for where we thought these guys would be in 2019.
And our Copa discussion kind of swamped the Euros, I think, necessarily, given what happened with that whole scene on Sunday. But Gareth Southgate, the England manager, has been the subject of criticism for years now, despite leading England to a couple of, finals and tournaments. Jude Bellingham saved them earlier in the tournament. They were down, I think, in 4 consecutive knockout games. And so, I would also note that Scaloni, the Argentina manager, would have come in for a huge amount of criticism if Argentina lost and Lautaro Martinez, who was the leading goal scorer in Copa America, came off the bench and scored the winning goal in this final. If, Colombia had sneaked out a goal at the end of the match and Lautaro Martinez hadn't even gotten in the game. And so it's just storylines get imposed after the fact based on results. I think that Southgate, I don't know if he's going to get a tremendous amount of credit for leading England to the final, but he certainly would have been fired, or the calls for him to get fired would have been a lot louder if England had gone out in one of these games when they probably should have gone out earlier in this tournament.
Yeah, I think the Southgate situation at the Euros is pretty instructive of all of this, where they won their first game, tied their second game, did not look great, and he was coming under a lot of scrutiny in the British media. Then they sort of luck into the easy side of the Euros draw, play terribly against a couple inferior teams, but get bailed out by a Jude Bellingham bicycle kick. And then in the second half against the Netherlands, they don't take a shot until the 88th minute, but they score in the 90th minute. And one of the guys that scores is a guy that Southgate subbed in. So it suddenly is reframed as Southgate is pushing all the right buttons. He made the sub that changed the game, rather than, it's a bad thing that England didn't take a shot until the 88th minute. And then finally in the final, they come up against Spain, who's a much superior team. It looked like they were going to do it again and sort of save themselves out of nowhere, but Spain deserved to win the game 2-1. Probably could have been more than 2-1. And now the Southgate question is, it's just very much up in the air, and they don't really seem to have matched their talent level, at least in terms of results.
And now you have U.S. soccer fans being like, man, I hope we don't hire Gareth Southgate.
Yeah, exactly,
that would be so horrible.
But they did reach out. Let's wrap it up here, Ryan. The U.S. Soccer did reach out to Jurgen Klopp, who apparently politely declined interest in the job through his representatives. And then over the weekend, Luis de la Fuente, the coach of Spain, who just won Euros, according to reporting, his people reached out to U.S. Soccer saying he might be interested in the job. And he's got some contractual issues with Spain, maybe using the U.S. as a stalking horse.
Maybe.
But now we've got a big name out there, and other big names get thrown around like Rafa Benitez and Xavi Hernandez as potential U.S. coaches. So who do you think is going to, what do you think will end up happening here? Do you think it'll be Berhalter Redux, or does the U.S. have the opportunity to actually land someone who, if not, reforming this team on the field, can bring a different sort of mentality and approach that may shake up the players and shake up fans' interest in the team?
They're going to announce someone called Gregg Berhalter as the next coach. I think the De La Fuente thing is instructive because he replaced Luis Enrique, who's now the PSG coach and was the Barcelona coach and is one of the greatest coaches in the world. And he did way better than Luis Enrique did with the same players mainly. So I think that's important to keep in mind as a U.S. fan when you think about all of this. But there is a world where in the European game, a lot of former players are getting hired to coach the big teams. So there are a bunch of sort of well-established coaches that have a history of improving teams that are available, like Thomas Tuchel, Mauricio Pochettino. So those, more so than before, there is a sort of glut of successful managers out there. Do I think the U.S. is going to hire one of them? Probably not. My guess is that they hire someone like, I don't know, let's say Yogi Löw from Germany, sort of a foreign manager with some success across the national team, but someone who really has no possibility of getting hired by Liverpool or Manchester City, because that's both the financial and the sort of competitive pool that I think they're playing in.
The appeal is that it's a 2-year job and U.S. Soccer can throw a lot of money at someone. We'll see, I hope fairly soon, what happens. Ryan O'Hanlon covers soccer for ESPN. He's the author of Net Gains, Inside the Beautiful Games Analytics Revolution, and writes the Substack No Grass in the Clouds. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Up next, I'll talk to crossword puzzle champion Paulo Pasco and crossword writer Kim Vu about the 2024 American Crossword Puzzle Tournament.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and SAP. AI is moving so fast. If you don't get reliable and relevant advice, your business might miss out. Welcome to Dear Artie, an advice column from SAP, where we tackle the tricky questions at the intersection of AI and business. Let's meet our expert.
Hi, I'm Ian Khan. I'm a technology futurist, speaker, and author, and I love to help organizations measure their current state of readiness for an AI-driven world. I'm excited to dive into today's question.
Dear Artie, our finance team is top-notch, but small. How can AI support them? Signed, Financially Drained.
Well, financially drained, a lot is happening in finance and AI, and the possibilities are endless. First of all, AI can help your finance team analyze massive amounts of financial data faster than any human or a team of people could do. Second, it can help perform functions on data through algorithms. This can connect different systems together and really simplify decision-making for your finance team. And last but not least, AI can help reduce the time needed for data to provide insights so that your leaders can make faster decisions.
Embrace AI with confidence. Head to sap.com/AI to learn more.
Whatever you think about the presidential campaign circus, one thing is guaranteed. The U.S. Supreme Court is going to be absolutely central to what happens in the coming election, and they've just released a raft of decisions that reach into just about every aspect of your life, from pollution to air travel, abortion rights, gun violence, and of course, presidential immunity. I'm Dahlia Lithwick, and we just wrapped up our Opinion Palooza series on Amicus, Slate's podcast about the courts and the law, where we break down the weedy details of Supreme Court news to make it accessible to real, smart, non-lawyer people like you. It has been a truly mind-boggling 7 weeks of news from the High Court, and we want to make sure that you understand it all. All of the episodes in this series are now available, and if you become a Slate Plus subscriber, you'll get access to a whole bunch of bonus episodes too, like The Court of King Alito, where we examine how this justice's fondness for flag-waving intersects with how he does his day job. Listen to Opinion Palooza on Amicus Now. That's AMICUS, wherever you're listening now.
The first National Crossword Puzzle Convention was held 100 years ago in May in a hotel in New York City. More than 300 people attended, some of whom joined the first speed solving contest. The winner was William Stern II, who completed an 11 by 11 puzzle of short clues and answers. Type of horse, pacer, form of pastry, pie, pronoun, hour, in a reported 10 minutes, 10 2/5 seconds. He won a dictionary. This April, more than 800 puzzlers gathered in a hotel in Stamford, Connecticut for the 47th Annual American Crossword Puzzle Tournament, or ACPT. The championship puzzle was slightly more interesting and difficult than in 1924, with clues like makeshift makeup tool, popsicle stick, jets and sharks venue, ice rink, and proclamation from a ruling party, it's lit. The winner was Paolo Pasco, who finished the 15 by 15 puzzle in 5 minutes and 42 seconds. He took home $7,500 and a handsome cup, and he is here now. Thanks for coming on the show, and congrats.
Thank you so much for having me.
Also joining us is Kim Vu, who finished 58th in the tournament and then wrote a fantastic story for Defector, the world's fastest crossword solvers can't tell you how to do this, which we'll post on our show page and you should all read. I'm here to say, though, that reporting on and playing in word tournaments is never easy, so 58th is amazing. So congrats to you too, Kim, and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Paolo, let's start with you. You're only 23 years old. You graduated from Harvard 2 years ago, and last year you finished second in the ACPT by literally 1.5 seconds after getting stuck on one final square for like 10 seconds. What happened then? How important was it for you to flush it, and how did you rebound to win this year?
Yeah, so what happened then was I realized that the way I had gone into the tournament was thinking that there's a lot of things I don't know, but all I need is for everything to line up such that, you know, the puzzles ask about the things I know about, and the things that I don't know, I can kind of figure out. And that worked with me for every puzzle up until the very last one, where it was 2 geography clues crossing each other. And I think a weakness for me is when I see geography clues or really any geography trivia at all, my mind kind of turns to static. So I did not read the clues very well. I missed hints that were in them. It was blank ACKAY was one of them. The answer was M for an Australian town with a Scottish name. Scottish name being a pretty bold signal saying, hey, this starts with Mac, but didn't see it.
And then what about this year?
This year, I came into it with a bit of a revised approach. I realized that instead of the idea that maybe I'll get lucky and the puzzle asks about things I know, I can learn stuff. I could try to learn things between now and then. So that's how I went into it, trying to shore up my weak spots. I realize it's a lot more prep probably than a lot of people do for the tournament, but I don't know. I feel like after coming really, really close, it's hard to not want it a little, you know?
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into like the way that crossword solvers prep. But first, I want to ask you, Kim, in your Defector piece, you wrote that crossword solving is a learnable skill with a low barrier to entry, and yet the distance between a top 100 competitor at the ACPT and a champion is not dissimilar to the distance between the best player at your local YMCA and LeBron James. This is exactly the same as in Scrabble. I'm an okay player. I was ranked in the top 100 in North America pretty recently, but I've never been and will never be even remotely close to the best. What makes Paolo and other elite crossword solvers so much better than the field?
I mean, if I knew that juice or Paolo knew that juice, he would probably try to hawk it to other people. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that go into it. One is that I think that there's a processing speed. I think it's trainable to a certain extent. I mean, there are shortcuts that you learn over the course of doing a lot of crossword puzzles. And, I talked about a little bit about them in my piece. They are learnable to an extent, but the pace at which you can read those clues, process that information, and tap into those shortcuts, we're talking about milliseconds that you save every time, but they add up over the course of a solve. And so, the puzzle that Paolo solves in 5 minutes, someone like me in the top 100 probably would solve it in 10 minutes, which I will probably be the fastest crossword solver that anybody in my life will ever meet, right? But the time and distance it would take for me to get even approaching Paolo speed would suck. It would be my full-time job. Getting to your original question, it's not even getting to the fact that I think there's like a processing issue, there's a memory issue. I think one thing that really struck me when Paolo was up there, and Paolo will have to confirm whether or not this is true, is that at a certain point in the grid, it seemed like everyone got stuck. But once he unlocked a critical clue in that section, it kind of just went downhill to the point where it felt like he wasn't even consulting the clue sheet anymore. So it felt like he had, in some ways, memorized or at least gotten the gestalt of all of these different clues and held them in his brain enough to be like, all right, well, I knew I was considering this for this slot. Now that I've unlocked it, I can fill it all in much quicker. Whereas someone I feel like me would be like, all right, I have to go back to the sheet to see like what that clue was. And again, when we're talking about that, like that's the time that adds up, that separates, the LeBron James and Brian Scalabrinis in this analogy.
It's not so bad to be Brian Scalabrine, though.
I think it's a cool party trick, but when it comes to competition time, I'm not the one holding up the cup. So,
and to be clear, the way that the finalists at the ACPT and other tournaments solve the final grid is they're standing on stage, they're wearing noise-canceling headphones. There's a big whiteboard with the crossword that they have to fill in manually, and they're holding the clue sheet in their hands when they're doing this. So there's also like the performance pressure of being up on stage and doing this in a way that may not seem natural when, most people are just solving crosswords on their laptop.
No, I mean, I think that's a really great point. Like another thing that, you don't think about until you're in the room is that they're on easels, right? And so there's a physical aspect of, on the app or in a newspaper, if you want to switch back to a section across the grid that you figured out, like you just move your hand.
Right.
But in this one, you're physically crouching up and down to get to the bottommost rows. So like there is a time and physical performance element to it too. Yeah.
So Paolo, I want to go back to the technique part. In Keem's piece, he writes about how some top solvers, a lot of solvers, read several clues at once to save time on reading clues, and then they kind of bulk fill in the spaces. And in that ACPT final, as Keem alluded to, if you watch the video, and I'll post the link to the video on our show page, there is that moment where it's like you had like an epiphany. You had like, okay, boom, the bottom half of the grid, you just go boom, 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 and you just fill it in as if you were just making up letters and sticking them in there. What's your approach for attacking a grid of a particularly tricky puzzle, like in a final? What's going on? Do you have a sense of what's going on in your brain as you're processing the clues?
I mean, it's a lot of panic, but immediately getting past that, I feel like Keem really nailed it with regards to remembering which clues go to which entries. So I may not, remember the clue exactly, but I might have a general sense in my mind of this word is related to food, this word is something in the environment, so that if I ever get stuck there, which ended up happening very much so, and you end up staring at the puzzle, staring at the clues, you don't do a lot of this looking back and forth, seeing if this guess is going to fit. You can just put in a guess and then see if it works with what you remember from the other clues. Because Keem's right. It is a lot of moving your arm around, moving your hand around, and as much as you can do to cut that number of motions down even a little bit against competitors who are very, very fast and very good at crosswords, that could make, a 1 second difference.
Yeah, and it's not like you've got an easel with a 3 foot by 3 foot, grid that you print out a different puzzle on every day. This is a different experience. I've also read that, and you mentioned this in the piece, Keem, that some solvers actually have a preference for handwriting, uppercase, lowercase, a mix, depending on which letter requires the fewest strokes of the pen. Because in the ACPT and other in-person tournaments like this one, you're filling out the puzzles by hand. You're trying to shave literally tenths of seconds off your time. But this is also one of those like weird subculture things. And we have similar tricks in Scrabble that makes observers go, yeah, these people are on another planet. What's your take on this, Keem? And what did the top players tell you about like handwriting and other tricks?
Well, okay. So, I mean, I think that when you get to that a certain level, every little millisecond counts, right? I mean, Paolo lost the championship by 1 second. It's not even, on some level, there are at least 4 or 5 different finals that have come down to small margins like that. So yeah, if you can shave off, the 1 second probably that it takes to write an E with 4 lines as opposed to just like a squiggly backwards 3, a lot of the top solvers said they've considered it. They've tried it. I think it's kind of like when a basketball player tries to adjust their jump shot, or a baseball player tries to adjust their swing. I think a lot of them, and I've tried the E thing, for instance, and now it's just like part of my handwriting, I guess. But, I think for a lot of the top solvers, you don't want to mess with something that's working really well for fear of like upturning a whole apple cart of stuff everywhere, right? Like if you tinker too much with your swing, maybe you gain a couple seconds here, but you lose something you can't even identify, further down because you're concentrating on that and not something else. So, I mean, I think again, you're right that it's like a weird subculture quirk that if you tell an outsider that, it makes sense intuitively, but it's a little strange. But then the more you sort of dig with it with top solvers, it's like, yeah, I'll try anything, but in the end, I don't know how much this actually has saved me anything.
Yeah. Paolo, have you done the handwriting thing?
Yeah, I will say I did make the conversion from the 4-stroke E's to a backwards 3E right before my first tournament. I saw it in a video while I was panic preparing, and I thought I should do that also. So I printed out some 40 puzzles, sat down at my desk. This was in college, and I had nothing else to do. So I just blasted through them until over the course of that night, the way I write E's just permanently became a backwards 3.
Paolo, you're part of a new wave of young players. You started doing the New York Times crossword in like 8th grade and had your first published puzzle in the Times when you were, 14, I think? The 3 finalists who solved the championship puzzle at the ACPT ranged in age from 23 to 34. On the one hand, you'd think that decades of accumulated knowledge is the key to crossword solving, knowing facts from life, from living a life. But like any quantifiable discipline, it's as much about studying and reps. And some competitors do like 10 to 20 puzzles a day. Others study the way Jeopardy contestants study, flashcarding, trivia. Paolo, what's your approach?
Yeah, I would say definitely going into it, and for most tournaments, comparing myself to the other people on that stage and in the top 10, I would say I'm definitely less a trivia-heavy crossword solver and more of a person who is attuned to the wordplay kind of part of the clues, which is to say the other people aren't good at it. They're very good, but I feel like my having done well at recent tournaments was not because of how much trivia I know, and more like in spite of how much trivia I know. But yeah, I think I have been working on that recently. Before the 2024 one, I tried, God help me, I flashcarded countries, I flashcarded their capitals, whoever won Oscars recently. I made a half-hearted attempt, went back to the 50s, retained some of it now, and I think over the course of the tournament, exactly one flashcarded fact was a clue/answer in the tournament, which isn't much, but, again, 1 second difference could be a lot. Helped me progress in that puzzle for sure.
No, that is like exactly why you study. It's like when I study anagrams in Scrabble. Like if a word shows up that I've recently studied in a tournament and I find it and it helps me win a game, I mean, it's all been worth it. Keem, what did you find out about that aspect of preparation from talking to top solvers?
I think what explains, or at least partially explains, why Paolo is such a good solver, in spite of, by his own admission, his trivia knowledge, is that it's almost like the meme about a beautiful mind, right? If you can kind of see what the letter patterns are and really narrow down what a thing can be, not from a trivia angle, but from like a pure word angle, then like that truly on some level is the best time-saving maneuver, right? I mentioned this a lot in the piece, but a lot of the top solvers really think about the time and energy and effort it takes to look at a thing, go to the clue, go back to the grid, go to a clue sheet, go back to the grid. Like that is where you're losing the most time. And so if you can just look at a space and say, there's only so many combinations of letters that could fill this space with the letters that are already there, I'm already going to mark down in my head the ones that are implausible in the sense that they would be so hard to ask for in a crossword that it would be unfair, right? Like these tournament puzzles are difficult, but they are also for everyone in the tournament, not just the top solvers. And so they have to be, reasonable. And so if you look at a grid and you can already narrow it down to that, you already probably have an idea in your mind when you get to the clue. And so you're not stumped by trivia, right? Maybe you've never heard of a specific animal or a specific, English king in that trivia, but there's only one English king's name who could fit in there. So I'm just going to assume it's that, double check, but now I can switch to, they say, if that's the across answer, I can just switch to the down answer because I'm assuming that that's the letter, but I don't have to waste that time to like double check that piece of information.
And Keem, it's the notion of only doing the downs and just filling in those squares. It's what I think people sort of recoil against competitive anything that takes something that's very common in daily life and transforms it into this deconstructed mathematical exercise, because it's like, oh, what's the theme? And that's all I really am interested in. And oh, what a cute clue and what a great fill. But there is something sort of just brute about the approach to doing this as fast as you can.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I always love comparing crosswords to sports because I'm a sports person, which is, I might as well be a unicorn in the crossword world. But I think it's so much more pronounced in crosswords because for the general public, most people look at a crossword as like this leisurely activity that you do on your commute, that you do on your Sunday morning breakfast. Like the object isn't speed, right? The object is to really enjoy the wordplay, the brain exercise. And so, when people see all of these different things that you're using to ramp up your speed so that it becomes like essentially fill in the blanks rather than the sort of deep appreciation for the clues, I think that, yeah, it is something that I'm sure, the average solver recoils against. Yeah. I will also say relative to Paolo's point about vibes, I mean, I think that, he's sort of gun shy about using that, but I think it's also the more puzzles you do, you also get the vibes of certain constructors and the way that certain puzzles probably have come together. Some, there are a lot of constructors who are a little more erudite in their references that really touch on, academic subjects and are more prone to say, tougher vocabulary, stuff from the classics, things like that. Whereas there are other constructors that are more, pop culturally, they want to bring in, celebrities and aspects that are sort of outside the mainstream, so I think that there is something also to be said about not just pattern recognition, but also, like you said, the general vibe of a puzzle and whether or not it's, something that's really testing all sorts of different knowledge or that it, feels like it's focusing in on something really specific.
The speed, though, is really what blows daily solvers like me away. I mean, last month, Paolo, you won another big tournament, Westwards in Berkeley, California. The 7 puzzles there had a total allotted time of 175 minutes. You finished without a single error in just 28 minutes, which was 11 minutes faster in aggregate than the second place finisher, 7-time ACPT champ Tyler Hinman. That's just sick. Keem, you wrote in the Defector story, seeing Pasco just dart around the board is what I imagine it's like to be in the building for Game 6 Klay Thompson, watching someone go supernova and do something so transcendent that it defies belief. Keem also mentioned, Paolo, that you once solved a Times Monday puzzle in 45 seconds. Are you even aware of like what you're doing when you are solving that quickly? creatively, or are you like in the proverbial sports zone?
Yeah, I think when I am solving, well, it's something that Patrick Barry, the constructor, has said about constructing, but I think it also applies to when I'm in a tournament, is that he enters a fugue state and suddenly the puzzle is done. And I think that is also what happens in my mind. I am very locked in on what's his clue, what's his answer, what's his clue, what's the answer. Look at the clock. I walk out of the room and I find it hard to remember any part of what I just did until I see the PDF some amount of time later. Which isn't to say I don't appreciate it. You know, while I'm solving, I'll smile at clues I like. One time I laughed during the ACPT, which I'm sorry to the people sitting next to me, but it was a really good clue.
A couple of our mutual friends, Ben Zimmer, the language columnist for the Wall Street Journal and a crossword constructor for Slate, and Nathan Last of the New Yorker, who's got a new book coming out soon about crosswords called The Electric Grid. They're editing a blog called Crossword Craze about 1924, where I got the information that I used in the intro to this segment. That was a pivotal year, the first crossword tournament, the first crossword convention, the first crossword book. And 2024 also is a crazy kind of time. You're both part of this recent explosion in crossword construction, competition, content, especially the approach toward greater inclusivity in puzzle themes and clues and answers. Keem, what stands out to you most about the current puzzle boom?
I mean, I think you said it right there in terms of the inclusive aspect of it. I mean, I think with the proliferation not only of crossword construction software, but also crossword construction software that doesn't have any cost, it just allows so many more people who wouldn't have imagined having the time and energy to construct crosswords for publication, much less, you know, national publication, to really enter that space. And I think that the more voices that enter that space, naturally, the more of the pop culture and cultural corpus that it's going to enter crosswords. I mean, you know, I said it before, with a really good crossword, you really get a sense of who that constructor is. What are their life experiences? What is important to them? Because, you know, a good crossword, every word, every clue is a really intentional choice. And so I think that, again, with the proliferation both of software and also online solving applications, you know, people are able to post their own crosswords on crossword blogs that they create that don't have to really hew to what, you know, a handful of newspaper editors think the broad reading audience of the New York Times will be able to solve and what is fair. And I think there's a place for that, obviously, in the crossword world, but it's really exciting for me to see, you know, if someone is just really into, like, I don't know, Magic the Gathering and Myst, or Shohei Ohtani and, you know, the infield fly rule. Like, these are the kinds of cultural pieces that would probably have been really hard to find in a daily crossword publication even 5-10 years ago. But now, you know, that kind of fill, those kinds of clues can really find their own audience out there. And I think that's really what a lot of people love and are responding to.
And the joke now is that the New York Times is a puzzles and recipes site that also offers news. Slate and Defector recently added regular crosswords. Apple offers mobile device puzzles. Paolo, you just became the games editor for LinkedIn, which kind of sounds weird, but it's not. What does that say to you about, like, the recent bull market for puzzles, especially non-crossword games, which is what you're creating for LinkedIn?
Yeah, it has been very good to see all the outlets want to get in on this. I feel like, from a purely selfish perspective, editing puzzles was not a thing I thought would be a job option really realistically at any time in my life. So the fact that there are now multiple outlets that are opening up, you know, big editing jobs, opening up new outlets and more opportunities for people who do puzzles, that's really nice to see. So coupling that with, like Keem said, the blow up in the puzzle community, it's so much easier than ever for someone to get started, to meet people, and to really get involved in this weird little subculture about a very, very common part of a lot of people's lives, but only a very select and very nerdy few think about it, you know, this often.
Paulo Pasco is the 2024 American Crossword Puzzle Tournament champion. He's also the games editor for LinkedIn and constructs puzzles for the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the Wall Street Journal, and other places. Kim Vu works in global public health, makes crosswords for the Times and others, and edits crosswords for AVCX Plus and Defector, where you can read his story, The World's Fastest Crossword Solvers Can't Tell You How to Do This. Thanks to you both for coming on the show. That was super fun.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Paolo and Kim are going to stick around for this week's bonus episode where we'll talk about constructing crossword puzzles, including a couple they recently had published in the New York Times. To hear that, and you'll want to hear that, you need to be a Slate Plus member. Join now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page or visit slate.com/hangupplus. That's all for this episode, but we've also got a bonus episode that's live right now. I talked to crossword champ Paulo Pasco and crossword writer Kim Vu about the art of making a crossword puzzle. To hear it, subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now. We'll see you there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to follow the show and to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Josh Levine, I'm Stefan Fatsis. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening.